Today we're doing something a little bit different. You've read the title, you know, generally speaking, what this video is going to be about, and have probably already begun to guess at what this video contains. But here's what I want you to do. At the end of this video, go down into the comments and do two things. One, tell me what shows I missed. And two, tell me why they deserved to be here. In a few weeks, I'm going to combine some of your answers into its own video, and then we can compare and see either just how mistaken I was to think that such a topic could fit into a single video, or that I was truly right all along. Crippling anxiety is telling me that it's the second one, but we'll have to see. But back to the video proper. What makes a good first episode? The first episode is what is supposed to hook you. It's supposed to tell you what the show is about. A good first episode contains three things: a stellar introduction to the show's world, a deep enough look into the main characters at the start of the story to tell you who they are and what their deal is, and lastly, a reason to keep watching until episode 2 and beyond. For many people, the initial episode to their favorite anime would always be on a list like this, but not always. For example, I love Shirobako, but honestly, the first several minutes of episode 1 are the worst in the whole show, so it's not going on this list. But several others probably will, to which you may ask, hey Ark, is this not just an excuse to hawk your favorite anime? I mean, not entirely. There are one or two here that I consider to be my personal favorites, but yeah. So then, ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and today on Glass Reflection, the best first episodes of modern anime. Beware of spoilers, if you consider talking about the first episode of an anime to be a spoiler. In any case, let's jam. We weren't really gonna try and make this list without mentioning this modern classic, now were we? It should not be contentious that this series is here, especially since Titan is practically one of the major series responsible for the massive boom of new anime fans in the year of its release. Titan showcased a new world that was both shocking and disturbing, but also showed this in such a way that you couldn't tear your eyes off of it. It took a lot of familiar tropes from the survival horror genre and flipped it all around by making their versions of zombies gigantic, giving their main characters gas-powered swords, and then wishing them luck and a good, quick death. Not only did this initial episode introduce the whole world, the major cast, and end on a point that truly shows the show was not screwing around, it also set up major plot threads that would not be resolved until countless episodes later. Just enough meat for people to theorize about for years, while giving them plenty to chew on in the meantime. Not only that, but technically, the first episode was only one half of a two-parter. Now, traditionally, when shows want an initial episode of that length, they just go and make its first episode twice as long so that everything is paced a bit better. But not Titan. There is enough in this first half of a two-episode story to keep you coming back. And so we did. Of course, then you do have the types of shows which make its first episode twice as long. By this point, isekai shows were nothing new, and while I wouldn't say that we had reached the same level of saturation that we have today, the genre was well on its way, following in the footsteps of the slice of life genre just a decade before. Have a couple of common characteristics from the genre separated by a major quirk that makes it stand out. In this case, a Groundhog Day-like storyline where the main character keeps dying until they find the proper route forward. Re:Zero was not the first anime to do something similar to this. Higurashi comes to mind, but it was the first to start laying its cards on the table this early. Granted, it needed the length of 2 episodes to do this properly, but it was well worth the extra runtime. What's even more fascinating about this episode is how often its actual plot is forgotten about, lost between the constant discussions of who is best girl and the hyper-focus on the current arc instead of those past. This is not a series that is specifically remembered for its stellar introduction, as by all accounts it only got better from here, but that doesn't mean its first impression was any less noteworthy. There are several things I will praise about the original Fullmetal Alchemist adaptation over its much better sequel, Brotherhood. Its characterization of its supporting cast, specifically the development of Maze Hughes, Aaron Dismuke as Alphonse in the English dub, and that the time it spends on early storylines gives those tales so much more depth than its follow-up ever did. The original 2003 adaptation of the well-known manga featured enough of an info dump to explain this world's version of alchemy, but not to the degree that would slow down the story, as it chooses to have protagonist Edward Elric compare alchemy to magic. And that's really enough to start it off. We see a bit of the main character's backstory, the event that will drive their personal story forward for many episodes to come, and then it lands us smack dab after a time skip where we start to get a feel for how a traditional episode of the series might play out, with our characters traveling to unique and interesting locales in search of a philosopher's stone, and inevitably wind up getting involved in whatever local mischief awaits them. This first episode doesn't even end this arc's story. But it doesn't need to, because like Titan would almost 10 years later, Fullmetal Alchemist started by showing a world very different than those we're used to seeing. It gave us a fresh take on existing tropes, and the action and personality to back it all up. This one might be cheating a bit, depending on what you consider the first episode of Death Parade to actually be. Originally an OVA released in 2013 titled Death Billiards, the story was then released as a full series in 2015, which is what we are looking at today. Not to say that Death Billiards is not a phenomenal bit of storytelling in its own right, or something that's not worth watching, but the initial episode to the series proper is no slouch either. Instead of taking place in a standard anime setting like a high school, some Tokyo suburb, or whatever watered-down fantasy universe the isekai genre had for us this time, Death Parade brings us to a place where we all must go, but rarely talk about: the afterlife. Death Parade tackles the age-old question of what might end up happening to us when we die, when we get to be judged by some otherworldly power, and how exactly that might work. But unlike what other stories might portray about the fairness of arbiters in the land beyond, the world of Death Parade in its first episode shows just how impartial those judgments can be, and in this episode specifically, that the best scenario is not always the outcome that lies before us. We here at Glass Reflection had a recent video about this series where we started by stressing that this show should be watched before you hear more about it. That's because this first episode contains a twist that makes it one of the more interesting ones on the whole list. So spoilers, by the way. We start off with the standard slice of life series following a young teenage girl and her 3 friends as they live out their high school life together. They go to class, have a unique school club, take care of a dog on school grounds. But throughout the episode, there are small signs, little hints, as it were, that the setting of this world is not exactly what it seems, only for it to be revealed in the final moments for all to see. Instead of the happy-go-lucky slice of life series that the episode started with, it ends in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, saying that it's always been this way. But our main character has a unique coping mechanism where she has been actively denying that any of this horrible stuff is even happening, and that everything is fine when it's clearly not. The series, as it progresses, has many ups and downs, as we showcased recently, but this first episode, that initial twist, is one that's hard to forget.
Listen for the voice of God, then follow it, and know that in time you will find your salvation.
He just totally snapped. Really? So what'd you
Yagami,
say?
are you still with us? Can you please translate the following sentence into English?
Wow. So amazing.
Oh, we couldn't forget this series, could we? If Titan was one of the shows responsible for the massive anime boom in the 2010s, then Death Note is definitely one of the shows that helped along a similar boom in the 2000s. This is a masterfully written introduction about absolute power corrupting even the most righteous of minds. Light Yagami is an interesting protagonist because he is not necessarily the everyman, But at the start of this show, he is somewhat of the ideal and model example of what society would like someone of his age to be. He's studious, the son of a police investigator, and in the first episode, he shows a clear idea of what is right and what is wrong. He is frustrated at the broken fractures of the society that he lives in, which to him are painfully obvious, and now he has a possible solution. Death Note is, of course, another example where the first episode is not the best in the series, but it is still one that strikes a chord as not only an absolutely solid start to an amazing series, but a solid story in its own right. Now, Trigun is the oldest series on this list, but I can't in good conscience make any semblance of a list talking about the best first episodes of anime without bringing up Trigun. Going into Trigun blind was the best way to watch this series back in the day. You know nothing about the world or the characters. You watch the show's opening sequence that gives you this guy in a Wild West setting, one banger of an opening track, and then an intro scene that sets up our protagonist as one of the biggest badasses who ever lived. Until, of course, you learn the true nature of Vash the Stampede. Vash has skills, sure, but he's also a massive coward, a screamer, a lover of donuts, and someone who just doesn't understand why he can't get a moment's peace without someone pulling a gun to his head. They are, of course, all looking for that massive bounty that does belong to him, but the bounty is something that keeps getting more and more justified due to a continual series of mishaps and bad luck. Now, further episodes will expand upon his character, as even this is not the true Vash the Stampede, but the bait and switch that this episode pulls is masterful. So much so that it actually takes quite a while for the series to build up enough steam to be enjoyable past this point. Though it does get there. Shame though that there are other shows which have brilliant first episodes that the rest of the series could not hope to live up to. That really does sum it up though, doesn't it? The first episode of Elfen Lied is honestly one of the best episodes from its entire decade even. A pulse-pounding escape by some kind of supernatural woman hell-bent on killing everything in her way. She is a being that is virtually unstoppable by the security forces that try to keep her contained. Now, of course, a much younger me in the early 2000s was indeed more interested in the fact that this being of pure rage and destruction happened to be a cute naked woman with pink hair. But still, the setup provided by this intro was so strong, so amazing, that it's depressing you honestly don't need to watch any more of Elfen Lied beyond this point. That's it. You've watched the only noteworthy part of this series and can move on after that. To what, you may ask? Well,
We're here. Well, it's just about time, Reg.
now, when I insinuated at the start that I was going to use this list as an excuse to hawk my favorites, this is basically what I was talking about. Made in Abyss is not a series like anything else. And I mean that quite literally. You are not going to find a series with a similar premise, with similar characters, and if I was to recommend shows like Made in Abyss, the best I could do is ones with similar tones, but vastly different settings. Made in Abyss is wholly unique in that regard, and everything about the world is so simple that it landed a clear explanation of all of it in just the first episode, alongside introducing our two main characters and their motivations that will drive them throughout the rest of the series and beyond. This episode introduces my favorite world, some of my favorite characters, minus Best Girl Ozen, and ends off on this fantastical scene with a song from Kevin Penkin that has been in an active playlist of mine since the first time I ever heard it. Though I will admit that this episode does not fully prepare you for what is to come with the rest of the series, as I don't think anything really could. On its own, it's a delightful look into a world that currently has no comparison, because nothing can compare with the void of the abyss. And finally, this first episode, unlike I think anything else on this list, does not really give you a good setup for what the series is actually about. It sets you up for the first arc, sure, but not the series as a whole, which, let me be clear, is actually perfect. While the initial intro scene to the series might as well be forgotten about for how relevant to the plot it actually becomes, the rest of the episode is a constant, balls-to-the-wall explosion of excitement and action, the likes of which only Gainax could have pulled off at the time. It showcases the main opposition for the first half of the series, it gives our protagonists a way to fight back, it gives us Yoko Littner, and topping all of that off is just this one bit of euphoria at the precise moment of victory. Gurren Lagann shows you how to start a series. Now, Gainax and Trigun have replicated this in other shows. I could have pulled up Kill la Kill, I could have pulled up Darling in the Franxx, hell, I could have pulled up Evangelion for a lot of similar reasons. But none of them have the same kind of perfection in tone and storytelling, I think, condensed in just their initial 20 minutes. For many of these lists, I like to leave the best for last, and I don't think that I'd be wrong in saying that while there are a lot of good first episodes mentioned today, Gurren Lagann does indeed showcase, I think, the clearest example of what it takes to sell you on a show quickly and become a beloved classic in the process. And that's it. Welcome back to the end of the video. I will be trying my best to have the streaming links to all of the shows in question here today down in the description, and of course, as I mentioned before at the start of this video, I am well aware that there are other extremely successful and brilliant first episodes of anime out there. So please, take to the comments to not only tell me what I missed, but why, and we'll come back in a few weeks with what you all came up with. Don't disappoint me. Lastly, a very special thank you to my patrons who not only support my work in general, but who allow me to do these kinds of videos. These ones where I can easily talk about some of the shows that I am passionate about instead of only sticking with the bigger blockbusters with every video. I do love and appreciate you all. Specifically though, as I like to do, I want to give particular shoutouts to patrons Richard Emil Bradley, Rune Jacobson, Ryfen Bonaparte, City Yamako, Wago221, Calhoun Boy, and Hector Montemayor for being especially awesome. You guys are great. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.